Wish TV, All Indiana Politics
is your premier source for Indiana politics.
Focusing on issues that matter to you.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage, exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders, expert analysis on critical legislation. From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good Sunday morning. Welcome to another edition of All Indiana Politics. I'm Phil Sanchez. Indiana Senate Republicans breaking with President Donald Trump and Governor Mike Braun. That chamber rejected a proposal to redraw Indiana's congressional maps ahead of next year's midterm elections. The bill to redraw the maps failed by a vote of 19 yes to 31 no. 21 of the 40 Senate Republicans voted against the new maps. They could have given Republicans control of all 9 of Indiana's House seats. Supporters had argued the maps were necessary to counter Democratic gerrymandering in other states. But opponents said that the maps would have paired communities with members of Congress who might not represent their views. And here's some of the debate and reaction from Senate leadership.
Some will say these maps are political. Let me be clear. You're damn right they are. Political policy is political. Safe streets are political. Look at Indianapolis. Affordable electricity is political. A drug-free Indiana is political.
I want to make sure there's a Republican majority in the U.S. House of Congress in 2026 is felt by every one of us, certainly myself included. We understand that those are policies that we think are the best for the United States of America and the best for the state of Indiana. And but there's a difference of opinion on how we get there, as I have explained before, because there are some concerns that going this route is not the best way to get more conservative representation in Washington, D.C. from the state of Indiana.
When it came to this bill, it really struck a nerve, and we heard that out in the State House today, and we certainly have heard it for the last almost 5 months. And so it's been a win for Hoosiers.
Now, Brace says lawmakers cannot revisit redistricting during this session. Governor Mike Braun says he's disappointed by a small group of misguided state senators. He released a statement saying ultimately decisions like this carry political consequences. I will be working with the president to challenge these people who do not represent the best interests of Hoosiers. Republican Congressman Mark Messmer says, I am disappointed in those who denied Hoosiers what they were asking for. It's a sad day for Indiana. Congressman Marlin Stutzman talked to CNN after that vote. Listen.
This is a team, a team sport. We have to stick together, and the state Senate in Indiana decided not to do so today. I'm really disappointed. I think it was a terrible decision. Unfortunately, we just don't have a state Senate that sees the big picture and understands the national implications of this.
President Donald Trump also reacting to the vote, and here's what he said moments after that vote came down.
Well, we won every other state. That's the only state. It's funny because I won Indiana all 3 times by a landslide. And I wasn't working on it very hard. Would have been nice. I think we would have picked up 2 seats if we did that. You had one gentleman, the head of the Senate, I guess, Braun, whatever his name is. I heard he was against it. He'll probably lose his next primary.
Indiana's 2 Democratic members of Congress say they're relieved. Congressman Andre Carson says to anyone who has wondered if prayer, calling your elected officials, showing up to rallies, and speaking out is effective, let this be confirmation that, yes, the people have power. Indiana is not a rubber stamp for the Trump administration. We are our own state with our own values and priorities. Congressman Frank Braun says, I strongly commend the courage and resolve our Indiana lawmakers demonstrated in reaching a firm decision against mid-decade redistricting. Their willingness to stand by the maps adopted in 2022 reflect a clear commitment to stability, transparency, and responsible governance. For more on this, let's bring in 2 members of Indiana's best political team, Republican Whitley Yates and Democrat Lindsey Hake. Good to see you both.
Glad to be here.
Yes, 21 Senate Republicans voted against this. So we'll start with you, Whitley. What happened?
I mean, I think we knew going into this when Pro Tem Bray said, we don't have the votes, we're not going to vote on this. And he was signaling that he knew that the votes weren't there or that they didn't exist. And so I think Governor Braun did what any leader would do and say, okay, well, let's see where each senator lies, and forcing them to have that vote, which is what inevitably happened, I do think was a win for Governor Braun. In the grand scheme of things, when you look at Indiana as a whole, it's 93% rural, right? While only 14% of the population live in the rural community. And the way that this map spliced up Marion County, this urban core, would dilute the voices of many in the rural communities, and those voices may not get heard. And so I do understand what some of the senators were saying and why they voted that way. That compounded with pressure, social media, bullying, swatting attempts, bomb threats. You're not gonna bully conservatives into an issue that is honestly a states' rights issue.
Lindsay, your reaction, and also, are you buying that this is a win for the Braun administration?
No, I think the Braun administration certainly has egg on their face this morning, tried to bury things pretty quickly with that announcement this morning of the IURC appointees. So we tried to push everything from yesterday under the rug, but I don't think there's any way that the administration can get away with calling this anything like a win. The overwhelming number of Hoosiers in polling at the protests at the State House, just the elongated presence, all of it showed that we are just not ready for this type of overreach, and that really the Trump administration overplayed their hand.
To your point, and maybe you could expand upon this, how much of a role do you think that the protest did play in this?
You had a lot of organizations speaking up against this, in addition to Hoosiers who took the day off, took work off, and decided to come down to the State House to testify on the day after a very big snow event as well. So you had a lot of organizations in addition. So not only did you have folks showing up from the counties way outlying Indianapolis, that just even more so shows that there's absolute intolerance for the overstepping that they were going to try with this.
Whitley, let's circle back to what you said about the Braun administration. You feeling like this is a win? Why do you think that?
Because in the grand scheme, what the administration was asking, or what he asked, was to know which senators were against redistricting, and it was important for constituents to know who is for and who's against. And so when Pro Tem Bray came out and said, hey, we're not going to be voting. We're not even going to vote. We're not even going to hear this in our special session. And then Governor Braun came back and said, oh, yes, you will. You're going to show up and you're going to do your jobs. That's how we have the vote now. That's how we know that 21 were nays and 19 were yeses. And if Governor Braun wouldn't have pushed for that, we would have never known and or not necessarily been in this position at all.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
I would argue it was such a waste of time. You know, we did hear some great legislation this week. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, aside from redistricting. But yeah, it was just such a distraction. You put Indiana on a national map for really unfortunate reasons, but it was great to see so many standard bearer legislators who have been fabric of this institution for decades. I mean, Jean Lysing, her quote was fabulous yesterday. It just said, well, they found out. You know, it was just fantastic. So I'd love to see that.
Do you think those Republicans should be worried about being primaried?
I don't know if they care. I'll be honest with you. Those threats have come left and right, and I don't think folks are scared, and that their votes show that.
What about you, Whitley?
I think they will be primary, but I don't think that they will lose. I don't think they have anything to worry about, because when it comes to a lot of our Republican senators, they are deeply rooted and entrenched in their communities, which is probably why they voted the way that they did. I don't see them having as much dissension. And if that dissension does bubble up, I don't see them losing their race after their years of service.
And then you even got to wonder if people even care by the time that comes around, right?
Well, that's the other issue.
All right, good conversation there. Stick around, much more to come. Also coming up here on the show, state lawmakers eye a major immigration crackdown. We'll tell you why employers might face an investigation. Welcome back. Well, employers could face a state investigation if they hire someone without proper immigration documentation. It's part of a major immigration enforcement bill that also expands who must be notified about federal immigration detainers. Our government reporter, Garrett Berquist, explains how this changes what's already on the books.
The Trump administration is pushing state lawmakers to build on this past session's immigration enforcement bill. But this specific bill is already drawing criticism both from people who say it goes too far and from those who say it doesn't go far enough. The bill prohibits employers from knowingly or recklessly hiring someone who is not authorized to work in the United States. Employers would not be held liable if they made a reasonable effort to check a person's status first. The state would investigate allegations and alert federal officials. The feds would handle enforcement.
We wanted to have local involvement, but we had to find the right place for that, again, because we didn't want to add another layer and put more burdens where it's unnecessary in law enforcement. So the Department of Labor in the state and IOSHA will put in standard procedures, and those allegations and investigations will be carried out as would be appropriate by that executive agency.
In addition, law enforcement agencies would have to comply with all immigration detainer requests and notify judges if a person in their custody is subject to one.
After a certain time, if in fact they are released by the local sheriff's office, at least that record of them having that detainer, so the next time maybe they don't have to go such a tedious process to find that information.
Immigration advocates say the new state law requiring sheriffs to notify immigration authorities already discourages immigrants from going to law enforcement for help. They say this will make it worse.
Those of us who opposed that initial bill this spring were raising concerns that it would lead to just this. And we were, kind of almost gaslit in a way. And, people were reassuring us that it would not lead to racial profiling, it would not lead to Fourth Amendment violations, whereas this bill seems to be explicitly covering that. And
Braun killed a similar bill when it reached her committee during the last legislative session. She says this new version addresses concerns law enforcement raised. But the Attorney General's office says there are too many loopholes.
Senate Bill 76 is introduced. It did nothing to stop the employment of illegal aliens. And the enforcement provisions added by the amendment, putting that enforcement under Department of Labor, is not only unworkable, but it is likely also unconstitutional.
We're still very early in the legislative process. The bill now has to go to the full Senate. At the State House, I'm Garrett Bergquist for Wish TV and WishTV.com.
All right, coming up, Indiana's best political team on that immigration bill and a measure to reduce medical debt after the break.
The opinions expressed by guests on this broadcast are solely those of the individual speaking and do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Wish TV.
All right, welcome back to All Indiana Politics. Joining us once again, Democrat Lindsey Hake and Republican Whitley Yates. Let's turn now to that immigration bill we heard about. There's a bill, as we just mentioned here, and you very well know, that could prohibit employers from hiring someone who lacks legal status, among other items. Now, the Attorney General's office, as you both very well know, says this thing doesn't go far enough. I'll get both of your take. We'll start with you here, Whitley.
I mean, I do find it interesting that the bill was not brought up last year, and the previous bill had more teeth in it and it had more enforcement measures. And so I do find it interesting that the committee that she oversees did not bring this bill up, and now we kind of have a version of this bill that is a little bit different, that lacks some of the same measures for enforcement, as well as could hamper some of the proceedings that we have, specifically when it comes to sanctuary cities that's happening right now in the state of Indiana. So I understand what she's attempting to do. However, I think we had a better bill previously that she should have utilized to build upon this one.
Lindsey, where does this end up?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you also had others speaking to this bill aside from Attorney General Rokita's, with Aaron speaking on Tuesday. There's also Mike Speedy, who also spoke to this bill, and he was in support. So, you have a Secretary of Commerce who's supporting the measure. You have the Attorney General who's opposed. This breeds concern for a bill's welfare. And you have members of the administration who are vastly have different voices in the conversation. I think we can all agree that immigration we need help. I wouldn't say that with the system. I wouldn't say that that's going to be up to Indiana. Do I think that needs to be a comprehensive effort in Congress? Yes, I do.
Lindsey, do the bill's backers have a point when it comes to this?
Not so sure about that.
Okay.
Yes, but I don't believe this bill will solve the sanctuary cities problem that people think it will.
Whitley,
I agree. It does not solve the sanctuary cities problem. I actually think the truth of the matter is we need for our employers to be hiring citizens, and we need to make sure that there are fail-safe, proven documentation ensuring that that's happening. And if that is not happening and you have employers that are circumventing the system, then there needs to be repercussions for that, for the employer and the person. And I think that that is something that most people and most Hoosiers would agree on. However, how we enforce it, I believe, is the centrist issue here. And I think that what the Attorney General is looking for, and not just the Attorney General, but Senator Banks is also looking for, are ways to enforce it, because we've seen time and time again where we have policy that's unenforceable and the problem persists.
Yeah. It's complicated.
Immigrants are part of our economy and will stay so, and that's all I have to say.
But illegal immigration shouldn't be.
All right, well, we'll see what happens with that bill. Let's turn your attention to other legislation that deals with medical debt, okay? So it would cap how much your wages could be garnished, and hospitals would have to offer payment plans to low-income families. Lindsay, would that work?
Yes, it would, because it already does. There's a scenario where this occurs in essentially in a process already. You can contact any of your, if you have medical debt, you can absolutely attempt to negotiate that. That's something that Hoosiers don't necessarily know. And Senate Bill 85 will absolutely work to make sure that we codify that type of policy. That has been really, really tough to see happen in Indiana. We've seen many of our nonprofit hospitals differ in the options that they will give folks, consumers who need help. And obviously the changes in the garnishment are a great step forward.
The session's going to end of February, Whitley. Is that enough time to figure this thing out?
I definitely think that it is enough time to figure it out. And I would say that codifying these types of payment programs so that people are not burdened by medical debt is very important to a lot of Hoosiers. And when you look at some of the legislation that came from the Braun administration during the last session, when it came to the transparency of hospital bills and being able to shop around for different services and surgeries and knowing the price of what those are, provides yet another competitive advantage. And so I can see all around why this would be something great that we should be doing for Hoosiers.
You agree as well?
I
Lindsay,
would
that's
say
enough time?
Yes and no. There's definitely enough time. We just hashed out redistricting within a 1.5 week span. There's totally time to do this. That's an excuse. But I think what also needs to be pointed out here is that charity care, if we have any type of amount of charity care, like other states will govern how much a nonprofit hospital will have to address charity. Like some states have up to 10% of charity care needs to be handed to folks in debt. And that is a concern for some on the committee, I know, and that was stated the other day.
Another story that we've been following this week very closely here is Martin University announcing that it will pause its operations at the end of the month. You'll recall lawmakers gave them a grant during the 2023-2024 budget year, but not for 2025 to 2026. How big of a loss is this, Whitley?
I mean, I definitely think it's a loss. It's one of the only minority institutions in the state of Indiana. And it's unfortunate to see that they weren't able to sustain income enough to continue running. However, the grant that they received was never supposed to be a continuation. It was only supposed to help that one time. And the fact that they were not able to maintain enrollment numbers, graduation numbers, is really unfortunate. And if I'm going to be honest, when looking at enrollment numbers across the board, there are some of our state institutions that have low enrollment numbers as well. And so it's really incumbent upon us to look at education and the totality of education and the cost of education to make sure that it is affordable and accessible so we don't have these things happen.
Yeah, Lindsay, your thoughts on this?
I don't disagree. I don't disagree at all. I would say any failure of an academic institution is our failure, and Indiana is not better for it. And I'm really hopeful that the trustees have more information. There's information that I have that that tells me that they knew this was coming. And so this shouldn't have been such a surprise. And so that worries me a bit, because obviously as a trustee, as a board member, your job is a fiduciary duty to the institution. And I'm concerned that there may be questions as to that.
Okay. All right. Well, good to see you both. Thank you so much for being here on a busy weekend and a busy week. Happy holidays to you both.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Much more to come after the break. Stick with us. We'll be right back.
The opinions expressed by guests on this broadcast are solely those of the individual speaking and do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Wish TV.
Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. We'll, of course, be back here next Sunday morning, as we always are, at 9:30. And be sure to check out the All Indiana Politics podcast online at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.